Hey guys, it's Madison, and today I'm going to be exploring a relatively new Japanese reading resource called Yomu Yomu. A couple of months ago, back in early November, I got an email from Do Chinese, which is the resource that I use most often for learning Mandarin Chinese, and apparently they have also started making this new language learning resource that's like the Japanese version of Do Chinese. So I was really excited to check this out. If you watch me for a while, then you will know that I typically use Satori Reader as my Japanese reading resource, and that I really like that app, so I am kind of curious to see how this site compares to that and how it's possibly better or worse than Satori Reader. All right, so I'm looking at the landing page for the website now. It looks like you can easily look up words and sentence translations, which sounds identical to the Do Chinese app. Looks like you can switch from kanji to hiragana. I wouldn't necessarily want to read things purely in hiragana, but I would like the ability, hopefully, to click on a word and see the hiragana, so we'll see if that's an option. Apparently, if you're very beginner, then you can turn romaji on and off, which I will not need. And then, oh, it looks like they even offer pitch accent. So this is super cool because I know for a fact that Satori Reader does not include the feature, at least like showing you with a graphic what the pitch accent is for words. Of course, you could, I guess, listen to the sentence in Satori Reader and like figure it out based on hearing it through a sentence. But I do like that they actually apparently will show you with the graphic what is the pitch accent for a word. So that's super cool. So far, the first thing that seems new and like an extra bonus compared to Satori Reader. All right, so let's go ahead and check out the actual lessons that they offer. All right, so just like Do Chinese, it looks like they offer a mixture of stories that have multiple chapters, as well as individual articles as well. For these stories, there's not a ton of them yet. Like I said, it is a relatively new app, or website I should say. But yeah, as far as these stories go, they only have beginner and elementary level of stories so far. None for the intermediate, advanced, or master levels. I'm sure they will add to those as they continue to add more content on this site. But for the articles, it does look like a pretty good spread between the levels. Okay, so before I dive into actually studying any of these, I am kind of curious as to what the different levels look like what's the easiest kind of content on here and what's the most difficult kind of content on here. So I'm gonna kind of skim through each level and just see what they have and what they look like. Starting with beginner 1, let's see, they have 2 stories. They have a course, that looks interesting. I'm curious as to what the course looks like. Oh, wow, very basic. So it looks like you can actually, in theory, start this from the very beginning. Okay, interesting. So it looks like they do have the translation of a word and the pitch accent if you just hover over a word, just like in Do Chinese. I am curious how the rest of this course looks. Okay, so it looks like most of the lessons in that course were like 3-ish to like 4 or 5 lines of text of some sort of dialogue, introducing some very basic kind of sentence structures and stuff. So it looks like this is designed for people to start from the very beginning, even if you don't know any Japanese, to theoretically be able to jump onto this app and actually start reading in Japanese. So playing around with some of the options on the actual screen, I see you can alter the speed of the audio. You can either show the different JLPT levels of words. Because this is a very beginner course, it looks all the same color, obviously, but when it's more complicated, it's much more like variety in color. You can also turn on or off the kanji, and you can also turn on and off the furigana. They mentioned you can turn on or off the romaji as well. I don't see that as an option here. Yeah, I'm not sure how you do that, but again, honestly, I'm not planning on using that feature, so it's not a big deal to me if it's not actually there. But if you are someone who thinks you might need romaji, especially at the very beginning, to see like what are these things spelling out, if you're not confident with hiragana or katakana, then yeah, I'm sure maybe somewhere on here you can set up the romaji, apparently, according to the landing page, but I don't see where. So for the articles, I think a lot of these articles for the beginner 1 are just part of that course. It does look like they do have a few that are not part of the course, like this one. Okay, yeah, so this one's like just introducing a person, an American school teacher named Michael, and I think it's a decent kind of bite-sized chunk of text for a beginner learner. Checking out the stories for the very beginning level, okay, not bad, honestly. It looks like the story is based on a vocab of 250 words, which is fairly big for an absolute beginner, but if you did go through that course first and kind of learn the very basics, this might be more accessible, especially when you can easily see definitions of stuff. I'm curious as to how long the chapters are. Okay, not too bad actually. So if you went through all of those basic, really beginner lessons, like I said, this could be a fun little challenge, I guess, after you finished all that. Yeah, okay, I was expecting a lot shorter chapters, so I actually am kind of impressed with how long these little chapters are for this very beginner story. All right, moving on to beginner 2. Let's see what they have. Just one story, it looks like. The vocab for that is 450 words, it looks like. So again, moving up, the length of them, okay, it looks like it's even a bit longer. I think these are actually even longer than some of the early Satori reader lessons as well, so that's interesting. Yeah, definitely a decent length here on the stories. So if you're a relatively low-level beginner of Japanese and you want to practice your reading, this seems like a really good site to use. Checking out some of the articles for this level, let's see. Much shorter, once again, a lot more bite-sized. So if that story, the length of that does look intimidating to you as a beginner, then you can definitely focus more on these smaller little articles as well. But I like that they do have a mixture of very short content as well as some longer stuff, all for this relatively beginner level of Japanese. Let's check out beginner 3. Again, one story available based on 800 words, so definitely moving on up in the world. Let's see, pretty similar length to last time. And as you can see, we are kind of moving up to a more colorful variety of JLPT vocabulary as well. And articles, let's see how long these look. You can see a little bit longer than the previous level. Let's check out a few more. Again, I think a pretty good, decent, small, bite-sized little thing to read. I'm gonna try and listen to the audio for this one to see if it's robotic or not. Let's see.
ラッキーな数字。あなたは好きな数字がありますか？日本では7がラッキーな数字と言われているので、7が好きな人が多いです。
All right, it's not the most exciting voice. It doesn't seem overly robotic. I'm actually not really sure if it's automatic text or if it's actually a person speaking. I will say that generally for the Satori reader audio for their stories, it's usually more like engaging, I guess you can say, because they have like these like official professional voice actors actually sounding out the stuff. So I think they have a little edge in the engaging voice kind of aspect of it. Although for Do Chinese, for the stories I've read, I have noticed that in those stories, they'll often have more of that like storytelling cadence as well. So perhaps for the stories, they sound a bit more storytelling as well. Let's see, in the elementary level, it looks like they have the human chair, which is that scary, terrifying story that I read in Chinese back for my Spooktober challenge. That was a journey, by the way, so go and check that video out if you haven't seen it, but I'm curious to hear this audio and see if it sounds a bit more engaging.
彼女はタイトルも作家の名前もないわ。これは変ね。
Okay. This does not seem as if a human is reading it. That was the most emotionless, that's strange, that I've ever heard. これは変ね. That's strange. So it doesn't really sound like they have an actual human necessarily reading these yet, or if it is a human, they're just not good at reading these stories in an engaging way necessarily. I don't think that's the biggest negative in the world. I do think that this is a good resource, especially for much more beginner level Japanese learners, just because, like I said, Satori Reader doesn't really have that extremely beginner friendly content on it. And especially since Do Chinese, the kind of sister site to this one, does have that storytelling kind of voice reading it, I do think that perhaps they will improve this in the future. Again, this is very early in this site's little lifetime, so hopefully this will be improved again over time. But yeah, it does look like at every single level they have a decent amount of articles at the very least. Again, only stories so far up to the elementary level, but it does seem like they do at least have, like I said, some articles even for more advanced topics. So I am kind of curious to see how advanced it gets. Let's look at the master level. Let's look at Japanese passports. I'm looking just at the sentence translations right now. All right, I'm checking out another article now about banknotes. Let's see, a similar length. Okay, wow, that's an interesting, wow, that is a cool looking word. It means unevenness, roughness, and it literally looks uneven and rough. That's cool. Okay, anyway, I was distracted by that cool looking kanji. It's unlike any kanji I've ever seen before in my life, but yeah, that's cool. Let's see. Okay, that sentence looks relatively high level. I don't know, I'm not sure if it's because I've read some news articles before in Japanese, but this doesn't seem like overly high level, at least in terms of like really difficult content. I'm not sure I would call this necessarily like master level, like it's labeled. Again, I'm just really briefly skimming through the translation, but I don't know, on first glance, it doesn't seem like this extremely like terrifying topic. I guess just because these sentences don't seem super long or complex. I think that was what surprised me the most of all, although this sentence I guess is relatively long. I don't know, I guess I'll have to actually read one to see how difficult it really is. All right, so that's the general overview of the site. Now I'm gonna actually take an hour or so and actually try to study a few of these lessons from the different levels just to see how it feels. I'm also gonna go ahead and make an account so I can actually save vocab words and see how the flashcard experience is as well to get that full user experience. All right, so it's a couple hours later now. I played around on the app for a little while, kind of got a feel for how it is and what it feels like to study both beginner content as well as the more advanced content on the site. After going through the site for that little bit, I do have a couple of thoughts. First of all, I did go through like the very beginner stories just to like see how difficult they were, like because they were kind of longer than I thought they'd be. I was wondering if they were kind of too complicated for beginners, but no, they were actually like, I could see the grammar going from very simple and kind of repetitive in like a good way, like the same verbs, the same kind of structures being used in different ways for the very beginner stories, and then getting gradually more complex as the stories got in the further levels. So I thought that was actually really good for those beginner learners who are looking for reading content. Also, I did actually go through part of one of the master level articles, and it was in fact more difficult than I thought when I was just glancing through the English translations of the sentences. The vocabulary is definitely very high level, and so it does seem on the advanced side of the scale. Now, a big caveat to that, of course, is that I'm not advanced, so I'm not the best judge of advanced content, but you know, trying to read it at my kind of intermediate state, it did seem pretty hard to me, so I don't know, take that as you will. These sentences themselves weren't super like winding or super complex, but it did have a lot of that, again, high level academic vocabulary and subjects. So now that I have kind of used the site a bit more, I did want to kind of talk more in detail about how it compares to the other app that I've used quite a lot, which is Satori Reader. I do think that Satori Reader is superior in several aspects, not every aspect, but several, including the fact that right now Satori Reader just has so much more content because Yomu Yomu is right now kind of just a fledgling website and eventually app. It's not an app yet, but it will, I assume, eventually have one once they develop it, just like Do Chinese. But because it is so new, Yomu Yomu can't compare to the amount of content that Satori Reader has managed to kind of build over time. Now, they are adding content regularly, both at Satori Reader and Yomu Yomu, so I'm sure that after a couple of months even, that kind of library of content will have expanded decently. And so there still is quite a bit at each level, so it would take you, you know, a decent amount of time to go through every single lesson and study it in depth. So there is a decent amount of content considering it is so beginner. Again, it's only a couple of months since they launched it, at least to my email, and so I'm impressed with how much they have considering how young the site is, but again, it can't compare to the Satori Reader app, which has been around for years now. Satori Reader also has a much better graphic design in my personal opinion. Yomu Yomu is very clean, very nice looking, I will say, but Satori Reader is just like the most beautiful language learning app I've ever seen, so it cannot compare to that, sadly. Satori Reader also has better audio. I already mentioned the professional voice actors versus I think the AI I'm assuming that they're using for Yomu Yomu. I do think that Yomu Yomu might change that in the future since Do Chinese, their sister app, does have that voice actor audio, I think, for at least their stories, if not all of their content. So I'm hoping that they will kind of update that in the future. But also, Satori Reader has the option to either play all of the audio or just sentence by sentence. You can click on a little play button there and just hear a sentence at a time, which is a nice feature that Yomu Yomu does not have. So it's a little more tricky to kind of like pick and choose what you want to listen to. You can like kind of click around while the audio is playing and move it, but it's not as clean or easy as it is for Satori Reader, unfortunately. I did actually use the flashcards on Yomu Yomu as I was going through the stories and like saving words. At the very end, I did like a little review session with the flashcards. It was fine. It was very functional. I think there's sort of ways it could be better. For example, there's no audio right now. Satori Reader does have audio, which is very nice. I like to kind of hear the word and see it when I'm reviewing it. And also, since Yomu Yomu actually has the added feature of pitch accent in the actual like article readings or story readings, I don't know why they don't include it in the flashcards as well, because they already obviously have all of that data in their system. I don't know why they don't kind of include that in the flashcards as well, because for me personally, I think that's where I'd want to actually like check myself and see, do I actually know the pitch accent for this word or not? And so having it not there in the flashcard, and especially with no audio either to check, I don't know, it seems like a really big missing piece of the flashcard system so far. And finally, the last way that I think that Satori Reader is superior to Yomu Yomu so far is the fact that Satori Reader has those like notes. If you tap on an expression or word, it will tell you, first of all, how it's being conjugated, if it's being conjugated, and also it'll add like an explanation if there's like an interesting expression or kind of a possibly confusing definition for a set of words. It'll like say that and explain it underneath the basic definition, which is really, really, really nice. And Yomu Yomu does not offer that. It just has the very basic definition. It doesn't say anything about the conjugations. I noticed this personally when there was like a conjugation that I was like, oh, what is that conjugation again? And I clicked on it, used to Satori Reader and expecting an explanation, but there was no explanation, and I had to like look at the translation of the sentence, and I was able to figure it out based on that, like, oh, it must be like the imperative or whatever it ended up being, but it wasn't as easy to see as Satori Reader, where they do like just tell you flat out what the conjugation is or what the explanation is for why this expression is doing what it's doing, which is a super, super, super nice feature. So those are several ways that I think Satori Reader edges out Yomu Yomu, but there are a few ways where Yomu Yomu is actually better so far, in my opinion, than Satori Reader. First of all, just the fact that there is such a variety of content across levels, the fact that they have like very, very, very beginner content as well as very, very academic advanced content. I think that's super, super nice. And it makes practicing reading in Japanese so much more accessible for all learners, not just once you reach a certain point in your learning. So that's a huge, huge advantage in my opinion. And also, not only do they have content from beginner to advanced, but also their content is kind of more varied. They have a mixture of those stories and the nonfiction articles as well, which is, I think, also really nice just to have both options there. Satori Reader does have some news articles, so there is a little bit of nonfiction, more kind of academic feeling stuff there as well. However, it's not, you know, across multiple levels. It seems all relatively advanced, or at least intermediate to advanced, nothing for kind of the lower levels of Japanese. And also it's just so much less than the stories. Satori Reader is mostly stories, which is nice, but it is nice to also have the option for that nonfiction stuff as well if you're more interested in that kind of thing in general. Now, like I did mention, so far, Yomu Yomu only has stories for the first 4 levels, nothing for the more advanced ones, but I assume, like their sister site, Do Chinese, they're going to add stories across all levels eventually, so I think eventually they will have both of those options, stories and nonfiction articles for all levels from beginner to advanced. And finally, possibly the biggest edge that Yomu Yomu has over Satori Reader is the fact that you have to pay for Satori Reader, at least to use almost any of its content. There's like a few little things you can read for free, but most of it is behind a paywall. I understand why. It has really, really great content, it has that great design, it has all that extra notes and explanations and stuff, so money is required to upkeep that, and so I understand why it's paid, but so far, Yomu Yomu is free, and that's an amazing, amazing free resource for learners of any level. Now, I think this is temporary. I think it will eventually be a paid service, or at least kind of a freemium kind of service where you get a small selection of things for free and then you have to unlock with money the rest of the content. The reason I think that is because their sister site, Do Chinese, is behind a paywall, at least most of their content is. It's also kind of a freemium kind of service where you can access some things for free, but the rest is paid. So I suspect once Yomu Yomu has an app of its own, just like Do Chinese, and after they have a bit more content to make it actually worth paying for, I suspect that eventually it'll be behind a paywall. So I really encourage you guys, if you are looking for Japanese reading resources, to use this while you have, you know, limited but not bad library of content while it is still free and not behind a paywall. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this new Japanese learning website. Let me know what you thought of this site. If you're interested in learning Japanese or you currently are learning Japanese, I encourage you to give it a shot as well. Also, if you are kind of upper beginner or above in Japanese, I encourage you to check out Satori Reader as well, because of course I do really love that app. But yeah, that's all for this video. I will see you guys in the next one, and until then, annyeong!